Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, New Challenges for Managing the Hybrid Workplace. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the Editor-in-Chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and today's webinar is presented by Space IQ. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. We will be on video today. Our speaker, James Franklin, will be on video, and I'll be here for the beginning and the Q&A. So please make sure that you can view the video if you'd like. You can pull down the bar in your window there, and you can see James and I. We will have a Q&A at the end of James's presentation. So please note the question panel in your control panel. You can send your questions in to us at any time, and they will be answered by James after the presentation. Also, if you have a technical difficulty or any non-content related question, please feel free to send your questions there and someone will answer you privately. Also, if you're interested in a continuing education credit for today's webinar, you will receive an email from Facility Executive automatically with that, and you can submit that to your association if you'd like. So now we will move on. I'll introduce your speaker, James Franklin, and he's with Space IQ. And you see James there on your screen. He is Chief Customer Officer at Space IQ, a global company that offers thousands of customers an integrated IoT-powered, user-friendly platform to effectively manage your real estate facilities, infrastructure, workplace assets, and to strengthen the employee experience in your organization. He's a transformational leader with a history of success in software as a service, customer relationship management, and professional services for a variety of industries, including tech, energy, logistics, and real estate. So with Space IQ, James is focusing on innovative uses of technology to transform how employees are using and benefiting from their workplaces. So of course, that's something that we hope you're all interested in today. And I'm sure, we're looking forward to a great discussion here in terms of what's been going on in the past year or so, and just overall, what's been going on with technology and workplace. So also previously, James was CEO of TechBridge, and that's a nonprofit that drives community impact by bringing affordable business and technology expertise to other nonprofits. His experience includes time with OmniLink Systems, Avanade, and HP, and he holds an MBA from the University of Maryland and a BBA from the University of Georgia. So we look forward to a talk today, and as I said, please send in your questions to us in that question box, and I'll look forward to going through those today. Hi, James, welcome.
Thank you, Ann. Really appreciate that introduction. And I'm very excited to be sharing some insights on what we've learned over the last year and a half as we moved, practically the entire world into a remote work situation. And then what we're continuing to learn as the workforce comes back to our traditional workplaces, but also how these workplaces are changing and what we expect to the future and how we're enabling our customers to face that future. So what we found with organizations that were leaving the office place, if we go back to March timeframe, we found some similarities on organizations that had an easier or a harder time. So first is companies and organizations that had more modern technology had an easier time, as you would suspect, moving into a remote work situation versus ones that may have been clinging to some more on-prem type technology, obviously had a much tougher time. So as we've had this work from home situation, for a year plus, many of the organizations have used this as an opportunity to really modernize their technology. It's just how much pain was involved as they did that. Well, certainly not all of them. We still have plenty of what we would consider more dated or more legacy type of technology, and companies are doing things in order to make that work in a remote work situation. But in general, the more modern, the more cloud-based, the easier this transformation and switch was. Secondly is the type of space. Organizations that already made some type of shift to a flex seating model or a more agile environment had a much easier time than ones that were focused on dedicated space. So one for one with a very traditional view around space of everybody gets a desk and you come into that desk 5 days a week. The ones that had already said that there was at least some level of accommodation for choice had an easier time, as once again you would expect. And then we found some interesting things around culture. And it was pretty incredible of how quickly this culture changed. And it varied by industry. So industries like technology had cultures already that focused on we're going to be very flexible in where people get their work done and also how we manage people. So there it's much more around employee experience and employee sentiment and creating an environment that might be inviting to an employee regardless of where the actual work is being done, but the whole experience. Versus, I like to pick a little bit, and sorry if anyone is from, the legal industry, but I think we can all agree that law firms tend to be a bit more traditional and therefore have a culture that matches that. And so they were rather resistive in general to this idea of you can work anywhere. But it was interesting that, so the shift was more difficult for them in general in those types of industries. But it's been very interesting that they've embraced it. And so even the more traditional industries and cultures, many of those are saying, as we start planning our return to office strategy, have had a substantial and sustained cultural shift in attitudes around what does it mean to do work and where to do it. And then lastly, I touched on industries a bit, but there's some things outside of culture that were interesting from an industry standpoint. Certain industries, like I think I could say tech again, are more, less rigid in some of their views and requirements around policy. Versus there's other industries, healthcare is a good one. Financial services is another good one. And so financial services firms in general had a pretty difficult time as they transitioned to a complete or almost complete work from home scenario because of all of the regulations that they had to comply with. So from a security standpoint, their focus was, and the easiest way of dealing with these requirements was to harden the workplace, which meant a physical place. So if you're in the office, we're going to make sure that there's good digital and physical security in place. And even if you're not in the office, we're going to limit how much of that happens, and we're going to use technologies like VPN and other things that still leverage a lot of that in place edge security. So as you move to a full remote work from home or remote work environment, there were some challenges that they had to deal with, and through no fault of their own, it's just a reality of the industry that they work in. So none of this is meant to convey, good versus bad, but really just, what's easier to deal with change and what's harder to deal with change. And then this led to some interesting thoughts around, maybe myths that we've learned weren't necessarily true, but also certain conventional wisdom which was reinforced. For example, I would say there was maybe a general sentiment on the work from home side that people might work less if they're working from home all the time. And I think we've probably all seen the data that says in many cases, and more than average, work went up. So people tended to work more, not less, on the average. And where that was coming from was a couple of things. One is there was less commute time, less wasted time, and a lot of that, what would have been downtime or admin time or just non-productive time, was converted into more work. But the other thing that was interesting is this isn't true in all cases, but for a significant number of our employees, they also converted some of that downtime into personal time, whether it's family time or picking up the kids in the afternoon from school or whatever the case might be. And, employees appreciated this extra time that they had to invest, whether it was professionally or personally. We also found that certain types of work were more productive in the home environment, not less, but conversely, other types of work, particularly like planning and collaboration, were much more difficult. And so as people engaged in work that might not be extraordinarily conducive to a work from home environment, there was stress. And we think that's where a lot of this burnout came from. So if you're engaged in very thoughtful and in-depth planning with your peers, and you're doing that in a video call for all day, then the science is pretty overwhelming that produces more stress than if you're in the office and you were doing it in a traditional collaborative setting, like a meeting room or whatever the case may be. So there's some pluses and there's some minuses. And also, there was some interesting savings. I think initially people thought, well, if you're not going into the office, I know employees thought, if we're not going into the office, then companies are saving a bunch of money. We actually found that the savings were probably higher on the employee side than they were on the company side. Once again, that is not universally true, but in general, that was pretty much the trend. Although we did see some companies that were able to adjust very quickly to the changes in demand, and therefore were appropriately able to adjust their supply. Like one company that I can think of during this time period was able to cut their portfolio down by about 60% in order to align with what they see as the future for their workplace. And I'll get more into that on what we see from a supply standpoint. And also there was an increase in understanding the importance between a physical space, an office environment, and what that does from a culture standpoint, what it does for fulfilling an employee's need to collaborate and learn from peers, and to progress in their career. Once again, great studies out there that the people that are interacting with leadership tend to do better in their careers than the ones that don't. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, whether it's the people that are more aggressive want those interactions, or if it's just what you see versus what you don't. But regardless of the reasons, we know and have learned that the office place is pretty important for most organizations. So then what have we learned as many companies are planning their return to the office? But we also have quite a bit of learnings from Asia Pacific part of the world, which is already returned to the office place. So in general, we see APAC, Asia Pacific, that returned early, started in January. There was even some that returned in Q4 of 2019 or 2020. And then in this year, from January on, we've seen a steady increase, and I'll share that data with you. The rest of the world is slower paced, and seems like most organizations are looking for a soft open this summer and more in the fall. But it'd be interesting to see what our audience is looking at, and we'll share some more data that we've been looking at. So I think it'd be good to go to a quick poll and see where you are with your return to office plans.
Sure, thanks, James. This is Ann back. And we'd like to ask everyone out in the audience to let us know what the plans are at your organization. So if you can please first answer this first question: when do you expect to soft open your offices? The choices there, as you can see, are already opened, June through September of this year, October through December 2022, or beyond, or not returning is the plan at this point. And then we'll show the results. Okay, so as you can see there, let's see, the lead 47%, nearly half June through September, so we're right in there, that time frame. And then James, you can see there 40% have already opened in the audience, followed by, trailed by 8% October through December, 5% not returning, and 0% looking at next year. So, okay, then we'll put up the next question to follow on this. So then we're going into when do you expect to fully open your offices? So already, are you already open? June through September, October, same time frames, October through December, 2022 beyond, not returning. So when do you expect to have the full open at this point? And with that, we have, let's see, I'll show those results. Let's see, 39% is the lead again with June through September, 24% October through December, 17% already open, 17% 2022 and beyond, and 3% are expecting not to return. Okay, thanks again, everyone. And one more is to round this out, and then James will talk on these. Over the next 2 to 5 years, do you expect the amount of space that you manage to go up, go down, stay about the same, or you're not really sure? So with all the changes that have been going on and with what you have planned, let us know, please, what you expect over the next several years in terms of your footprint. Okay, and then we'll pop up the results once again. And there the leader is stay about the same with 44%, followed 29% will decrease as expected, followed by 14%, not really sure, and trailed by 13%, an increase in space. So thank you very much. We'll get back to the presentation and James, and thanks everyone. Please remember to send in your questions too. Back to you, James.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do that. So let's compare that versus some prior polls that we've done. And so this group, congratulations. I would say that you're doing extraordinarily well in your soft open. You know, based upon the results that I quickly wrote down, I would say you're you know, right in line with that soft open, if not ahead. From a 2022 standpoint for the full open, you know, once again in line, not returning at all is a bit lower, but in general, I would say your results are aligning to the norm. We can also show what patterns we're seeing in APAC, which, you know, as I mentioned before, returned early. And so this is reservations, you know, aligned to capacity. So this is employees booking reservations in order to come into the office, which is the norm. In order to come in for our customers in the APAC region, they have to have a reservation and reserve a desk to make sure that we're managing, you know, distancing appropriately. And you'll see a steady rise up to just above 40% utilization. What's very interesting on this is there is a wide range on what this means. It's not 40% across the board. Larger cities are running at a lower utilization, with the smaller cities running much higher, with a city like, let's say, our Darwin, has the highest utilization in Australia, which is running at about 80% utilization of their space. But a city like Sydney or Melbourne is running for Australia the lowest utilization, and they're more like 20% or lower. And right now that's going even lower because they're actually under lockdown again. So because they've had an outbreak in cases, and this has happened, maybe this is the third time, I'm not sure, during the pandemic, where they've already said they've loosened restrictions and allowed people to come back to the office. There's been an outbreak, they shut it back down, everybody has to go work from home again. So this is the second or third time that they've had to once again reimpose restrictions that prevent people from coming into the office. Sydney, which has had less of those re-lockdowns, it's still running rather low. And what we hear is, as far as why, is seems like public transportation is one of the primary concerns, which makes sense. A larger city, public transportation is much more of the norm, and therefore there's still some concerns about you know, getting in a very enclosed space with a whole lot of strangers and heading to the office place. But there's a variety of reasons. And then as far as preferences go, we're seeing what you would expect, a concentration of people in the office in the mid-work week. This distribution is rather similar to what we see pre-pandemic. So our opinion is that this will still take time to normalize as there's new policies and new ways of working that are adopted, and you know, maybe we'll continue down this path, but there might be more of an effort to even this out a little bit. Time will tell. But interestingly enough, as far as utilization for work week, very similar trends. We also found that the approach that organizations are taking in their return to office planning falls into a few different profiles. So we have the organizations that are looking at a very short-term focus, and by short-term focus, we mean for the return to office event. These organizations are pretty much focused on reservations and health checks, and what do I need to do to get everybody back into the office for my soft launch and my full launch. And it's really just a very strong focus on allocation from a reservation standpoint. They are not focused as much, if at all, on what about new ways of working, new composition of space. For a variety of reasons, they may think nothing's really going to change, or, and I'll get into data later on what percentage is looking at that, or they're just not sure yet, and so they're delaying decisions on that. The next group that we're seeing is very focused on the new normal, if you will, and the what operations might be like in this new environment, but they're focused on not trying to invent that for themselves, but they're saying we want to adopt what is a best practice and what is typical for our industry. So I describe this as the easy button, right? Like we don't believe how we're going to return to the office and manage our space is something that is a strategic driver for our success. Therefore, we want something that's tried and true, that's going to work well for our needs for today and whatever they may be for the future. And it allows us to do our operations very effectively and easily. And then the last one we call trailblazers. And these are the ones that are really innovating. These are the ones that are talking more about activity-based working and are talking more about culture and how space is really an extension of the strategy of the organization. And they are really looking at this return to office. It's just an event that's happened on a transformation that they've been on, a journey that they've been on for quite a while, actually. And then we put this fourth category that really spans all three of these, and it's facility owners and owner occupiers, and they have a different set of needs because they need to support all of these approaches. And for them, it's working with this profile around latest innovations in facilities and physical management, whether it's BIM to FM or digital twins or incorporation of IoT and other sensors, to maximize real-time data and efficient operations. And these approaches are helping us, guide how we best consult our customers on what product or solutions or approach might be right for them. But with all these customers and industry participants, we're saying it's very important that you understand where employee expectations reside today. Couple interesting stats is most cities or cores have lost population. We've seen a very clear trend in people moving to whether it's more into the suburbs or to a new location in general. It's unbelievable the amount of meetings that I'm in with organizations based in Northern California, and somebody relocated to Idaho. So it seems like Idaho is experiencing a real estate boom because of folks from Northern California. And so there's that dynamic playing out in many urban centers around the US and really around the globe. Also, as employees are moving or they're just adapting to the new norms of working from home for such a long period of time, they've very effectively incorporated managing their new work environment effectively. So most employees believe that their productivity has actually gone up, or at least is very conducive to a productive environment with a work from home circumstance. And so this last statistic is clearly showing that the majority of employees feel so strongly that their current environment is working for them that if you mandate that you give that up, if you have to go back to the office 5 days a week, the majority of employees are saying that's a non-starter. We're not going to do that. And this is just one study. There's a huge number of studies, but they're all pointing to the same thing, that employees like working from home, at least in certain circumstances, and giving that up completely will be a challenge. So there's certain barriers we see in planning the returned approach, and there's certain things that are helping quite a bit for the return. So barriers, as I already mentioned, employee sentiment around, we as an employee have been able to free up time in our schedule that we've allocated to our jobs, and so our productivity has gone up, but we've also allocated it to our own life, and therefore I'm able to get more done both personally and professionally. And so that has real value to people, and there's certainly barriers to disrupting that in a massive way as you reintroduce your employees to the workplace. And then, as I mentioned with the public transportation example, but there's many, there's a lot of sentiment and concern around health and safety, and it varies by region, by office, by city, by employees involved. Whatever the circumstances are, there's certainly some thoughtful barriers that need to be evaluated and navigated as you're planning that return. But there's also some things that are helping propel the return to the office. Social is a big one, especially your extroverts, but also the folks that are aggressive and want to engage in what's going on in the organization and want to feel like they're a part of the direction of the organization, whatever that may be from a decision-making standpoint or whatever. There is a meaningful segment of your employee base that wants to get back into the office. And it turns out FOMO, and this was mentioned by one of our senior executives, and I had to laugh. I didn't know what FOMO was at that time, and they educated me on talking to me about a Friends episode where Rachel picks up smoking just so she can participate in her boss's conversations outside because she thinks valuable things that are happening out there for her career. So it turns out that a lot of employees feel this way, and so they don't want to feel left out. And part of not feeling left out is being in the office, collaborating with peers, and seeing management. But keeping all this in balance is definitely not going to be easy. Change management, as I alluded to, is a very delicate and tricky task. And employees have a lot of different various levels of cautiousness that they're feeling. And like I said, it could be from lots of different sources. Regardless of what that source is, the organizations that have their return to work strategy go more successfully are the ones that are really sensitive to what those are. You can't accommodate all of those sensitivities, but you at least have a plan on how you're going to address those and how you're going to respond to them when they pop up. And all of this means you're going to need new policies in place, and you're going to have a new type of workplace. So most organizations are, especially in the soft open, are accounting for some level of ramp up and choice. So that means probably the workplace is going to be changing. This just came up today, as a matter of fact, for one of our office openings, and there was a request to fit out the workplace and what would be a more traditional style. We've already invested in fitting out a lot of home workplaces, and so having that same level of fit in two different locations probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And so, the conversation happens on how do we make sure that we're aligning the workplace when you have when you're leveraging multiple workplaces to be most conducive to the type of work that's going to be involved there. But that's going to be difficult to keep all this in balance. So as we figure out how to keep all this in balance from a return to work standpoint, it's important that we think of where is it going to eventually end up. Like once we get people into the office, we're pretty certain that we know long term we're still going to see a lot of agile and a lot of activity-based working. So the example that I just mentioned, if we know in the short term we're going to have employees leverage their work from home environment, the remote work environment at their house, and need a certain level of capability there, and then when they come to the office, we're going to fit that out for a different type of activity, then that's not a short-term decision. That's something that we're going to do for the long term. And the industry as a whole has been moving in this direction for quite a while. As we see in the last decade, the amount of organizations that adopted an agile approach more than doubled. So clearly now, in the last year, there's been a significant adoption to that, but removing that, what do we see when people return to the workplace? We think it's going to be the norm. And that's based upon the data that we've collected and others. So this particular study is from PricewaterhouseCoopers, but I would say like the data that the surveys that we've grabbed as well as others are all pointing to the same message, which is most organizations are going to have a flex or agile approach on their return, and they're going to stick with it. We see a few organizations that are giving up their space entirely. In this particular study, it was 13%. For this audience, if I remember correctly, it was 3%. I think the norm that we're seeing across all of our polls is more in the maybe 5 to 7%. And then if you look at the percent of organizations that are saying business as usual, this one below 20%, we're probably seeing even lower than that. We definitely see a group that says we're going to go back to dedicated one-for-one seating and a traditional makeup for that workplace. But the norm for sure is an agile environment and therefore new types of space in order to deal with that agile environment. Most organizations that we talk to as they plan this new normal, they're focused on what's the schedule going to be and how many sites and where these sites might be, or whether it's a work from home situation or whether it's new locations based upon employees being more geographically distributed, and the policies that you need in order to accommodate all that. And the organizations that feel like they're really getting it right, have the right policies in place to cover where they are regardless of locations, and they know what their locations are, and they feel like they have a really good schedule worked out in order to manage capacity and be fair across their employee base. But we believe that the organizations that do very best and have the very best performance are going to go a step further and are going to look not just at the three categories that I talked about, but go beyond that and say what creates the very best employee experience and how are we going to drive the very best productivity, and they're going to base that on the type of work that's going on. So activity-based working in essence, but not only that, but doing it in a way that drives what's right for your business based upon where your employees are, based upon what your business needs are, based upon who you are as an organization. And it'll be different for each organization. And so the ones that find that right balance are going to have higher levels of productivity, better talent retention, and therefore we believe will do better in their marketplace. So activity-based working means a few different things, and what we look at is there's consensus on a few different themes that we think are extraordinarily important as you look at whether activity-based working is right for you or not. So first is having choice. So, and choice doesn't just mean in your seat or just being in the office or being at home, but it's a wide variety of choice, like what type of space, space type. Based upon the activity that I'm engaging in, I need choice so that I can pick the right type of space based upon what I'm trying to do. And the organization has enough trust in me as an individual that I'm going to pick the right type of space, the right environment, the right location, so that works best for what we're trying to accomplish. And then they're going to be absolutely focused on how do we mine the data to understand productivity around those choices, a focus on changing the environment so that it is more productive based upon space type. There's a lot of design aspects in this, and also movement. There's been a great deal of science that indicates the organizations that allow for a work environment that is more conducive to movement are going to have happier employees, are going to have more productive employees. And so what does that mean from a design standpoint? You know, movement is just one aspect of movement is spending some of your time working from home and some of your time in an office. Another aspect is allowing them to go to different sites. And another is even within the work environment, making it so that they're moving around. And like I said, there's been good science out there that you have probably seen that says, you know, as you change your physical location, your learning and innovation increases. So I think these are all important aspects as we think about what activity-based working means. And it's important that we understand that even if we get it right for today, it's going to change. And we know it's going to change over time. I want to go back to what we found out in this poll when we said, is space going to go up or down or stay the same? And there was a pretty large amount of the group that thought it was going to basically stay the same. The research that we see is actually seeing a pretty big majority thinking that space is going to increase. And this is being driven in a few different ways. One is the belief that while there will be, you know, less days in office, there's going to be a need for more space per person as we look at how to build more collaborative space. And there's also a thought that organizations may actually err on the side of more space rather than less as they figure out what this looks like. And then lastly is culture is becoming a major driver from the C-suite. And so as organizations are looking at how do we build for the future, how do we make sure that we have the very best talent, you know, CEOs and CFOs, what we're seeing are erring on the side of caution, which for them means we need to make sure that we have more space so that we have this really productive environment that allows us to attract really great talent. And there's other things that are changing as well. We've seen a massive change in composition of jobs and in industries, and we think that's going to continue. There's a great McKinsey study that says, in addition to the jobs that people have changed already from the pandemic, that another 25% of the workplace is going to change jobs directly due to the pandemic. So that means different types of work are going to be done, which means different types of space will be needed. So this evolution is going to continue. And so we believe the future has a few different themes. One is it needs to be tailored for your specific environment. We think the very best performers are going to have an approach and a space and policies that are going to fit their needs. And we also think, you know, as I said, that that's going to require flexibility because what you need today may be changing tomorrow. And in order to have that flexibility, you're going to need fantastic data. It's going to need to be accurate. It's going to need to be data that you can rely on and at your fingertips. And as these changes in supply and demand come faster and faster, the industry is moving towards real-time visibility into your occupancy and into your needs. And so that real-time data is going to become critically important. And the organizations that do all of this well are going to be able to really drive space as a strategic differentiator for their organizations, whether it's from a productivity or a cultural standpoint or whatever the case may be. They're going to have the strategic use of space for better performance than their peers. So what are we doing in order to help make this frictionless workplace a reality? And we divide you know, the tools and capabilities that we provide to deal with this new future into 4 different buckets. But in general, it follows you need to understand what you're trying to achieve and your business drivers and your environment and the unique drivers that are in place, turn that into a great plan, roll it out to your workforce, and then monitor and adjust. And what we're providing is we have launched across our platforms new analytics tools that take all of the utilization and occupancy data or whatever data, sensor data, whatever it might be in your environment or even external to your environment that might be driving your needs, and producing new analytics and capabilities so that you can see that and devise an approach that works for you. And then we're pairing that with best practices workshops and various consultation for the organizations that need that we can go deep with them into understanding what is your data telling you about what your right approach is and how you can get more out of your data and how you can use the solutions that we provide to drive better insight into what's going to work right for your organization. Which leads us into the planning. And we have our new analytics dashboard. And once again, regardless of the solution, we know that it's going to be critically important that all organizations really understand what their capacity and what their demand is. And so with the use of real-time data, we have found customers have extraordinarily great success with being able to understand where has supply and demand correlated on a real-time basis as they're starting to plan this new future for them. So as you saw with our return to office in APAC, leading organizations are using these analytics tools and using this real-time data to really understand where are we trending, how are we going, what do we think the impacts are going to be that are going to drive the future. And then they use that in order to figure out what their approach is going to be and what level of supply they're going to need. And that booking demand allows them to really be smart as they think about what space we need to open when. And then that allows them to put that plan together and really understand where do we need to have dedicated seating, if any, and where do we need to have our neighborhoods and how do we design those neighborhoods so that we have a good, productive working environment for the people that are coming. Not having a team spread out all over, but having the right people in the right place to make for the right work experience. And then on the work experience, making sure that employees have phenomenal capabilities from a mobile standpoint so that they can quickly find a desk, they can book a desk, they know what amenities they need and how to get to those. And we're also seeing that a good tool here, like the Engage tool that we're rolling out or the SIQ Mobile, helps employees reintroduce to the office so that they know where they're going. They can visualize it and they know how to get there and they know how to find their coworkers. And the organizations that are embracing these tools well are finding a much easier time as they come back into the office. And we also know, once again, real-time location is important. Employees find it much easier if they know where I am, where am I trying to go, help me navigate that, help me feel like I can be productive because I have visibility into where I'm at and where I'm going. And then lastly, monitor and adjust. So if we know we're in a highly dynamic environment and we have our real-time utilization, we can start to manage our space in a real-time basis. So whether it's we have congestion in a particular location and we need to adjust that, or looking at it for traffic patterns and we can start to see how people are utilizing the space in real time, this has been an extraordinarily valuable tool for the organizations to adjust based upon what's happening in real time. And then the innovation that we're driving going forward is how do we use this real time to actually make smart decisions around space, such as if we're running on a Monday or Friday, based upon our reservations, we know that we're going to be running at about 50% capacity. Then how do we make smart choices around moving those allocations around so that we can get the most productivity out, whether it's by reducing some space and moving people into more adjacent space, or whatever the case may be based upon what your specific needs are and what constitutes the best use of space given that real-time demand. And then we've also rolled out a new mobile app for facilities maintenance. The needs for real-time maintenance and compliance, certainly much more complex and much more critical now. And so having the ability to put that into the hands of a facilities manager has been very well received. And then lastly, incorporating the latest cloud tools from organizations like Autodesk. We're finding that BIM to FM and asset management in general is becoming extraordinarily important. Amazing innovations happening on the BIM to FM side. So we're very excited to be partnering with Autodesk. And in one of the ways that that partnership is manifesting is taking their cloud-based Forge platform and incorporating that into our solutions. So thank you very much for your time, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, James. Thank you for that presentation. Appreciate it. There's a lot of ground to cover and a lot of interesting information that you laid out there. So we do have some time for some Q&A, and I'll jump right into that. Folks in the audience, please do send in your questions, and we will get to as many as we can. So let's see, James, I'll start off with, you talked about barriers and drivers of return to the office at the beginning of the pandemic, how organizations were able to respond right off the bat, and then also now a year or so out, what some of those barriers and drivers are at that point to the change that they're looking to make in whatever that scope is. So the question is around change management. Have you seen the pandemic removing any barriers, perceived or otherwise, to implementing space data management tools in the workplace? So has the pandemic been able to kind of remove barriers that may have been there previous, or how have you seen folks deal with that overall?
Yep. So there's been a lot of changes in attitudes, but the one that I'll focus on for this question is, I would say, the use of real-time data. It varied by region. For whatever reason, in APAC, the use of location data, real-time location data for employees was not controversial. So it's pretty normal for that type of technology to be in place and be used. In Europe, a bit less. There, you think about GDPR quite a bit. Europe's privacy laws and obligations for employers around that kind of data. And then in the U.S., North America, which had the lowest adoption, is the greatest concern that employee sentiment would be extraordinarily negative for a workplace that tracked them. Now, in a post-pandemic world, we're seeing a lot of those barriers around sentiment being removed, and that's in all markets. Organizations that a year ago said we would never use real-time location data are now saying it's pretty critical that we able to do that, because we're not going to be able to provide the type of level of experience to our employees without it. We're not going to have a really good understanding of how to manage our space without it. And then there's the health and safety aspect of it. If we need to know if we have congestion, if we have issues, and we need that real-time data in order to effectively manage and respond to those potential issues that may surface. And we're seeing an employee attitude change as well. As we all know in our personal life, people will disclose an awful lot of information about themselves if they perceive some value. And in this new environment, employees are getting a lot of value out of having real-time location data as they try to figure out how to navigate a new space and connect with the people and the resources that they need in this space.
Okay, and in terms, just to follow on that, in terms of meaning of how employees are benefiting, in terms of, is that in terms of knowing where coworkers or others might be, or amenities and things like that, where those are available?
Correct. In the short term, there's a lot of that. Maybe mid to longer term, on the more innovative side, there's use cases like heading to the office and maybe the parking is full, and so you would want to know what the capacity is, not just in your traditional space, but in something like parking. And so you could be diverted to a different space based upon real-time availability. There's also concierge type services like I want a coffee, right? So when I'm at the office, and it could be as simple as when I badge in, or whether I'm, where I am in real time, deliver a coffee to me, which seems to be popular on the West Coast of the United States. And there's lots of different use cases like that. The industry, I think, is still evolving in how we can use that type of location data to make employees' environment more friendly and more productive.
Okay, all right, thank you. So then I'll move on to metrics. You talked about a lot of different capabilities of workplace management software. So what are some of the key metrics that facilities teams should be looking at to determine what key metrics should they be tracking that would determine a successful transformation? I know you talked about occupancy data, obviously the real-time location data. So can you just kind of break that down as some key metrics if someone was starting out or expanding on this capability?
The number one ratio that a lot of our customers talk about is their ratio. So people to seats. Maybe in the past we had some organizations that were striving to get to 1. Now we have companies that are saying we're striving to get to 1.6. I hear 1.6 a fair amount. So that may sound pretty aggressive to many of you, maybe not. Some of you will, I don't hear many people saying they're going to go beyond 2, so 2 people per desk. So that's certainly an important metric, and one that we as facilities executives and managers need to pay attention to. The other is while we don't have a really great metric industry-wide to track it, but it would be that real-time flexibility in adjusting to supply and demand. So many great innovations coming on managing the supply side in response to demand. We're already pretty good about understanding what our flexible demand is. And so I showed you some of that data that says, how reservations are increasing, what our utilization is on a given day. So then the next step is, now that I have a really good understanding of what my predicted utilization is over the next few weeks, what do I do with that in order to manage supply? Our industry in general, supply was something that we thought about in years potentially. Mm-hmm. There's going to be opportunities to think about supply in terms of days.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's see, we have time for a few more questions. So I will, we'll jump into what are you hearing about social distancing? Is the 6-foot distance rule something that will be in effect until the pandemic is lifted entirely? Is that something that you wanted to comment on? And I also did want to piggyback on that, where you were talking about, expected space needs in the next several years, and you had talked about even if less folks are coming back, maybe more space is needed. Is that because of social distancing? As the second piece of that question.
I would say it's not necessarily for social distancing requirements. The attitudes that we see around social distancing vary greatly by region. In some places it's law, and there was, I think it was a 6-meter requirement, and then it came down to a 3-meter, and I think now it's 2-meter, converting 6 foot, and I think originally it was, pretty massive. Mm-hmm. And so in some places it's whatever the law says, and that's what we'll conform to. In others, I would say 6 foot on a global basis seems to be the norm for now. As far as what we see going forward, it will be less about social distancing, and I think it will be more around creating a type of workplace that's conducive to the type of work that we're doing. So if you're trying to do planning and collaboration, it's going to be a different type of space than stacking in your cubes. So a lot of the expectations that we have around square foot per person are going to change for social distancing in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be because we're doing focus work in a different location than we're doing our collaboration work, and therefore the needs are going to be dramatically different. And then I also mentioned about how we're seeing CEOs err on the side of more space. We see that conversation happening a lot. I want to make sure that we have an amazing environment that shows well, attracts the very best talent. I want to do something really phenomenal, and I'm going to need more space to do that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. So then on that topic of kind of flexible seating and you know, where people will be kind of located throughout these spaces as we're planning them. We did have a question here. Can you clarify the difference between flexible seating and neighborhooding? You mentioned you had a slide up there with neighborhoods. So can you just kind of clarify that between flexible seating and neighborhooding? Is the difference there, only difference there on who can book the space, who those occupants are?
Yeah, that is correct. I would say neighborhood is an aspect, is a feature that you can leverage as you're doing flexible seating. And, you know, I'll give you my norms and my vocabulary on this, but I don't think there's a great standard across the industry. But when we talk about a flexible environment, we tend to talk about, you know, the allocation, like where people get to sit, right? When we talk about a hybrid environment, it's more about the location, right? So whether you work from home or come into the office is the hybrid aspect of it. If you're going to come into the office just a portion of the time, you need to have a flexible capability of where people are sitting. So as you start making decisions about, you know, I can sit in one desk or another desk, I'm not tied to a particular desk. How do I manage that? Some organizations are saying no reservation required whatsoever. Everything is open seating. Come find a seat and you're good. And those organizations are looking at real-time data. So in the parking example that I mentioned, I don't want to go to a parking garage if it's full. I also don't want to go to the 10th floor if it's full. So give me information about where open seats are on a real-time basis, and that's where I'll go. And we have some customers in APAC that are doing that. There's no reservations. Most organizations are doing reservations, and they use neighborhoods as a way of saying, I want certain groups of people to be clustered together. And whether it's I want to assign an allocation so that finance or marketing or any group has 50 seats in this area, and I'm going to base that on their 1.5 ratio, right? So they may have 75 people in that group. We're going to give them 50 desks, and they're going to manage that that capacity. So that's a neighborhood example.
Okay, thank you for that.
But there's other reasons for neighborhoods, such as people collaborating on projects or different groups that need to collaborate with each other and therefore need adjacent neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So I guess we have time for one last question. And this is, I see this as being really based on, you know, your observations as well as Space IQ overall. And the question is, what percentage of employees are coming back to work versus work from home? Is it a 60-40, for example, or 90-10 ratio? I'm going to take that question as I didn't follow up with the asker here, and please type in further if you'd like, but I'm taking that as the employees who are coming back versus work from home, you know, completely kind of thing, versus this kind of, you know, flexible schedule we've been talking about. Do you have any observations on that, maybe cross industry or overall, anything, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. The percent of organizations that are saying they expect their employees to come in 5 days a week, pretty low. It's there, you know, maybe 10%, give or take. You know, in some studies it's less, in some studies it's more. I think I cited a couple studies. One, I think the highest was 17% that said we're going to go back to, you know, traditional seating, which might be, you know, let's say 4 to 5 days a week in the office. From an employee sentiment standpoint, it varies greatly by region. In the less congested, you know, the lower the population density, the more willingness there is to go to the office. I would say that 20% in your initial opening seems to be about where we're at. There was very early on, there was one organization that did their soft open, and they were really early, and they were planning on a 25% return based upon their employee surveys. 25% of employees said, we want to come back to the office, not 5 days a week. They just wanted to come back.
Okay.
In that first wave. When they actually opened it, they only had 12%. So be a little careful about the surveys. The surveys are super important. Pay more attention to your reservation data, and especially early on, organizations weren't hitting their reservation data as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that, James. Okay. Well, it looks like we're out of time. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really appreciate all the great information. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.
And I'd like to thank all our attendees for your participation today and for sending in questions. Please note that you will receive, a recording will be available on facilityexecutive.com of this webinar, along with the slides. And you will also be able to visit the Space IQ website to see that and to learn more about what you're hearing today. And that's spaceiq.com. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.